Good morning and welcome to Sunday Square Off. I'm Brahm Resnik. Rachel Mitchell has been on the job as Maricopa County Attorney for just a week and a half, but she's no stranger to the office. Right now on Square Off, Mitchell tells us how she'll deal with the twin challenges of repairing the office while campaigning to keep her job as the county's top prosecutor past November. Also on today's show, new fears of measles outbreaks among children as new state data shows parents are opting out of shots for their kids. Valley Starbucks workers will find out whether their union drives are a success. And why the next governor won't have the same powers that Doug Ducey did to deal with the next pandemic. We start with our new county attorney. Here's what you need to know. Republican Rachel Mitchell was appointed by the Maricopa County Board to fill the vacancy created by Allister Adel's resignation. Mitchell will serve through November unless she wins the special election, and then she will continue in the job. Mitchell is an Arizona State University Law School grad who joined the county attorney's office straight out of school 30 years ago. Most recently, she was chief of the Major Crimes Division. That included death penalty cases. She was best known in the office for her work as a sex crimes prosecutor. And Mitchell is also barely a month into her first political campaign in the Republican primary for county attorney. Her opponent is Gina Godbehere, a former prosecutor for the city of Goodyear and a former colleague of Rachel Mitchell's in the county attorney's office. Democrat Julie Gungle will face the primary winner in the November special election. And now, Rachel Mitchell, welcome to Sunday Square Off.
Thank you very much.
So you were sworn in, about 2 weeks ago, but you knew what you were getting into. You've been in that office 30 years, seen, I think, 4 county attorneys?
Yes.
In that time, maybe 5. Still, given all that, was there anything you found that surprised you, that you didn't know, that you thought maybe you needed to know?
Well, obviously, anytime you take over as the top person in any organization, there are some things that you weren't privy to. And so part of my job just this past week and a half is to, get my hands around some of the issues that have been brought up that I wasn't directly involved with.
How significant were some of those issues that maybe we haven't heard of and certainly you haven't heard of?
Well, most of the issues have been reported on, but they are significant. As you know, we have a backlog in charging. We have a backlog in charging or reviewing officer-involved shootings. We have a number of civil cases stemming from the protest cases. So there's quite a lot to look at.
So talk about the backlog, because there are, you and I have talked about this, and I don't know if you have a number yet, but there were at one point maybe hundreds or more than 1,000 potential felony cases. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
And and how large is that backlog given what this office, the rate the office should be performing at?
It's large. It's larger than, there's always a backlog because we handle tens of thousands of criminal cases a year. And you also have to understand that COVID played a part in that because we could not charge at, I'll just say, full speed. But it is larger than normal.
Are there people on the streets who you're concerned should not be on the streets right now because of that backlog?
I think there are people on the street. There are definitely cases that we need to get to as quickly as possible, but I also have a responsibility, and this is why it's a complex issue, to make sure it's not just charging the case. You've got to have somebody that can prosecute that case. And that's the bigger issue, which is we're down pretty much across the board 20% personnel-wise. And so one of my first duties is to get that staffing level back up again.
And so how do you do the triage on all those cases to get them moving as quickly as you can?
You have to have certain guidelines in place with each bureau, depending on, the type of bureau, the type of case, so that they can look at the ones that they need to get to more quickly.
Are these cases, what I said about perhaps people walking the streets who shouldn't be on these streets, is this backlog putting the community at risk?
I think the backlog, you could always, every time you have a case that you don't get to immediately, there's something that could happen. So it's speculative, but it's certainly something that we need to be concerned about and we need to get to.
There's one case, at least, that's closely watched. I know you're very well aware of it. The former corrections director, Charles Ryan, state corrections director, faces charges of assault on a police officer resulting from a standoff outside his home in Tempe 4 months ago. Has a charging decision been made on that?
You should be hearing something very soon from our office. When I was sworn in and we did the press conference that day, I told you I was going to be briefed that day. I was briefed that day. And so you should be hearing very shortly from our office on that.
Let me put that case in a larger context. You've talked about rebuilding trust
Yes.
in that office.
Yes.
Do you view this case through that lens? Because I hope you understand the way lots of folks in the community view this. Man points gun at police. We're still waiting, and one of the cops said he feared for his life. We're still waiting for charges. Do you understand the lens?
I absolutely understand that there's a link when there's a delay in getting to a case like that. And so that's why it was so important for me. And I said I want briefed that day.
But in terms of rebuilding trust, again, this is an older white man, to be blunt, pointing a gun at officers. There are many who feel that if this had been a person of color, that would have been dealt with, the case would have been dealt with much more swiftly, a decision would have been made more swiftly. Do you recognize those feelings out there, and do you take that into account as you review this case?
I recognize that there are those feelings out there, but I also have to individually look at each case and see what the proof is. I can't charge somebody based on what has happened in other cases. I want to be consistent with the law, and I'm going to do that. And I think if you do that over time, you're going to build that trust, but I have to be consistent with the law.
Help us understand how you look at this job. You've been a prosecutor for 30 years. How have your views of defendants, of victims, of punishment, how has that changed over time?
You know, it has changed. When I was a younger prosecutor, obviously I didn't grow up in a situation where I saw a lot of crime, and so there was a different perspective back then, but now that I've seen a lot of it and I've read a lot of research and I've really tried to educate myself and make myself an expert in areas like risk and recidivism, I think what you'll find about me, and others have said about me, is that I don't paint people with a broad brush. I understand that there are gradations of seriousness. There are people who need help and diversion, and there are people who need to be taken off the street. And we need to understand that and act like we understand it.
So Arizona was rated in a recent news report as the 5th most punitive state in the country. Maricopa County plays a big role in that, given the number of prosecutions you do, and its size. Mandatory minimum sentences are one reason. Plus, only 4 states spend a larger share of their budgets on corrections. Are you comfortable with that ranking and that amount of spending?
I have to look at it globally like that from a 30,000-foot view, but I also have to look at it individually. And so one of the things that I'm doing is I'm meeting with our diversion group to see if we are being effective, if what we're giving diversion, the cases we're giving diversion on, if we can expand that. In fact, I've developed a couple of diversion programs to include more people in it so that we can make sure that we're giving people the help they need to be productive citizens and not crushing them. And so it's hard to look at that huge number and say, well, is every single case within that appropriate? I have to look at the cases.
This office, your office, historically, or the last several years at least, has stood in the way of criminal justice reforms at the Capitol. Would you see yourself as a partner for lawmakers, Republican or Democrat, who want to move on those reforms?
Yes, actually there was one bill that failed at the last minute, last session, and it had some very good aspects to it, but I think the failure of my office was to not work with the legislature to tighten up the language in that, so to make sure that it didn't include things that we didn't want it to go to, like very serious crimes. And so yes, I am open to that.
You are open to that?
Yes.
Beyond what your office has been comfortable with in the past, with leaders of your office?
Yes, I mean, our office spoke on behalf of that bill, but the problem was that there were other people who had legitimate concerns about the bill was written too broadly, and so I think we need to work together instead of having this assembly line where, you know, we come in and say it's okay and somebody else comes in and says it's not okay. We need to all come to the table.
Do you think of yourself as a classic law and order prosecutor?
It depends on what you mean by that.
What does that mean to you?
Well, I think classic to me probably has the connotation that you just go for punishment. I think that's what most people think of. So in that sense, no, I don't think of that myself that way. I think of myself as trying to be evidence-based and an intelligent prosecutor and a compassionate prosecutor. You know, when I have done introductions to the office for young attorneys, I have told them that, you know, we have the greatest job description in the world, which is to do justice. But in appropriate situations, I tell them, mercy is as satisfying as justice. And we have to figure out where that's appropriate. And I truly believe that.
I do want to touch on the prosecutions of the Black Lives Matter protesters that your office was involved in. Those charges have been thrown out. There's a Department of Justice investigation going on. Have you spoken with Department of Justice investigators?
No, they briefed the previous administration on their work on the Phoenix Police Department.
At any point, did you play a role in advancing those charges against the protesters?
No, in fact, the opposite is true. Back in February, I was asked to look at specifically some protesters that had been arrested in August of 2020. And I think I have the I think I have the, you're right.
COVID time is tough.
Yeah, COVID time's weird. Actually got with the chief deputy immediately and said we need to set up an incident review and look at these charges. And as you know, those charges were dismissed.
What did your review find?
My review found that what was in the police report did not match what the charges that were filed.
Did you ever imagine your office could do such a thing?
I was disappointed.
You're a Republican candidate for county attorney now, so let's ask you a question, a candidate question. What questions are you getting from voters about your job?
I'm getting a lot of questions about it. People are concerned about the border. That seems to be a very prevalent concern. Obviously, I've been getting some concerns expressed about the drug trade, which can be related to the border, fentanyl, for example. People are asking questions like you've asked about criminal justice reform. So it's broad-based. People seem to be more wrapped up in this election than in past years, I think, and that's great.
When we come back, Rachel Mitchell on the abortion rights decision we're expecting from the U.S. Supreme Court. And later, more Arizona parents are balking at giving their children measles shots. Is it a legacy of the pandemic's anti-vaccine campaigns? Stay with us.